You think you know your family, but what if the person you trust the most is hiding a dark secret? What if your own grandmother is not who you think she is? In this story, I came to visit her, expecting love and warmth. But what I found was a carefully hidden life filled with terrifying secrets. Secrets that have haunted a small town for decades. She smiled at me. She fed me. She called me by name. But behind that gentle face was a predator, patiently waiting, cataloging people nobody would miss. Teeth, names, photographs, all of it meticulously organized, and I was next on the list. By the end of this video, you'll see the horrifying truth that I discovered too late. The terrifying realization that someone you love could be someone you should fear. Stay with me, because what I found in my grandmother's house will shock you, disturb you, and change the way you see family forever. I had been driving for nearly 8 hours through the endless plains of Iowa. The cornfields stretching like green oceans under a sun that was just starting to dip toward the horizon. The GPS insisted I had another 40 minutes to go, but the road had narrowed into a 2-lane country road, and every passing mile felt like moving through someone else's forgotten world. The further I went, the more I wondered why I had agreed to come, why I had not just stayed in Chicago, keeping my life simple, predictable, and safe. But Grandma Eleanor had written me a letter in late July, unexpected, brief, and slightly alarming. I need to see you. There are things only you can understand. I remembered the last time I had seen her, 10 years ago, before she disappeared from our lives and the obituaries announced she had passed away after a house fire that destroyed almost everything she owned. Now, the house came into view, a small, white wooden structure, its paint peeling just enough to make it seem aged, real. A rocking chair sat on the porch, unmoving in the warm breeze, and the bell on the door jingled as I got out of the car. I could hear the faint sounds of a radio inside, some old country station, the voice of a man singing about heartbreak and whiskey, mixing with the distant hum of cicadas. I took a deep breath, trying to convince myself this was normal, that seeing her again after so many years would not be strange. She opened the door before I could knock, moving with the frailty that matched my memories of her. But her eyes were sharp, and the smile she gave me felt almost rehearsed. "Michael," she said, her voice as calm as the Iowa plains. "You've grown taller than I remembered." Her arms wrapped around me in a hug, and I could feel the faint stiffness in her joints, the bones pressing through thin skin. She smelled like mothballs and lavender, just like she used to. And for a second I almost believed that the 10 years, the fire, the obituaries, none of it had mattered. The first night was as normal as a visit to a small-town grandmother could be. She served roast chicken with mashed potatoes and green beans, insisted I eat more than I wanted, and asked me about my life in the city. Yet, there was something off. She asked questions I had not expected. "Do you have someone who really watches over you? Who would notice if you disappeared?" I laughed it off, thinking she was just worried, lonely, or trying to fill the quiet house with conversation. But when she kept looking at me in a way that seemed to measure, calculate, I began to feel that something was not quite right. The next day, I noticed little things. She kept a strict schedule, insisting I rise for breakfast exactly at 7:30 a.m., that I eat only what she served, that I wash my hands in a particular way before touching anything in the kitchen. She had a notebook on the counter with neat lists of names and dates, which she quickly hid when I glanced at it, but not before I caught a glimpse of a word repeated on several pages. Alone. At first, I thought it was just the habits of someone who liked to be organized, someone with age and memory on her side. But my unease grew when I realized she never left the house for long. The town's convenience store, the little diner across Main Street, even church services, she made excuses to stay inside. Nighttime was worse. I would wake up to the sound of her walking the halls, moving furniture softly, sometimes muttering under her breath. The old wooden floors creaked, but she made sure the steps were measured, quiet. On the third night, I heard a door open that I thought led to the basement. She had told me the basement had been flooded during last winter's storm and was unsafe. I got up and peeked, but the door was closed, and she appeared instantly behind me, smiling as if she had been standing there the whole time. "It's nothing, Michael," she said, brushing my hand from the door. "Just checking the wiring." I wanted to believe her, but my heart had started to pound. Something about the way she said it made me hesitate, made me realize that she controlled this house in ways that went beyond normal. It was on the fourth day that I found the first hint of what had been going on here. I went to the bathroom to brush my teeth and noticed a small wooden box tucked behind the row of cleaning supplies under the sink. It was old, roughly carved, and closed with a thin, worn leather strap. Curiosity overcame caution, and I unbuckled it. Inside, neatly wrapped in pieces of clean white cloth, were human teeth. At least 50 of them, some yellowed with age, some pristine, almost polished. I pulled out a folded piece of paper and read a single word scribbled in faint pencil. New. My stomach turned, and I slammed the box shut, shoving it back under the sink. When I confronted her about it at dinner, she laughed softly, a sound without warmth. "Oh, you found that," she said, calm as if we were discussing the weather. "Those are just mementos. People forget their teeth all the time. I keep them safe." Her explanation made no sense, yet she said it so convincingly that I did not argue. I tried to eat my dinner, but the mashed potatoes felt dry in my mouth, and the chicken seemed tougher than it should have been. I realized, in a slow, sickening way, that she was not joking. Over the next few days, I began to notice patterns. She asked me strange questions about loneliness, about my friends, about who would come looking for me if I did not return to Chicago. She kept a notebook that I was not allowed to touch, scribbling notes that I sometimes glimpsed from the corner of my eye. I began to keep my own mental tally. The sounds at night, the strange questions, the way she always had a hand on the phone in case someone called, the way she watched me eat, measure me, observe me. Then I found the photographs. They were hidden behind a loose board in the living room wall, tucked between the insulation and the paneling. Each photo was of a person who had stayed in this house over the past 30 years. Men and women, young and old, all smiling uncomfortably at the camera, some bound by ropes or lying in beds that were too small, too sterile. On the back of each photo was a date and a short note. Vanished. No one noticed. Last night. And in some, just a name with nothing else. My heart froze when I saw a photograph of a boy my age with a note that said, "Kept safe, 2011. When I showed her the photos, she did not scream or protest. She simply smiled, a quiet, patient smile, and said, "I've been waiting for you to see them. Now you understand why I wrote to you." I wanted to run, to call the police, to escape the house immediately. But something in her presence rooted me to the spot. She knew me, claimed she had always known me, and in some dark, terrifying way, I realized she had been preparing for this moment for years. The letter was not an invitation. It was a test. That night, I barely slept. The creaking of the floors, the low hum of the house settling, the soft shuffle of her movements, it all became a background to a realization that I could not shake. I was not just visiting my grandmother. I was inside a carefully constructed world, one she had controlled for decades, one that had absorbed people, one that I could easily become part of. The next morning, she cooked breakfast as if nothing had happened. She served me scrambled eggs and toast, asked about my dreams, and smiled when I refused the orange juice. She watched me eat, counting bites, measuring my reactions. And I understood, with a clarity that chilled me to the bone, that she was not the woman I remembered. She was something else entirely, something that had worn the skin of my grandmother like a mask to hide in plain sight for years. And so, trapped between recognition and denial, I realized that the quiet little house in Montana, the gentle voice calling me by name, the familiar scent of lavender and mothballs, all of it had been a carefully maintained illusion. My grandmother had died long ago. The woman who now smiled at me across the breakfast table was not family. She was a predator, patient, meticulous, and frighteningly intelligent, and I had walked straight into her domain. From that moment, every step I took in that house was measured. Every glance, every question, every move I made was observed. And the true terror of the situation was not violence, it was patience. She had all the time in the world, and she had already decided my place in her collection. The next morning, I forced myself to act normal. Breakfast was a tense ritual, her sharp eyes watching every bite, every sip of coffee I took. I kept my hands folded, my back straight, pretending I did not notice the way she measured my reactions with that same calm, calculating smile that had haunted me since I first saw the box of teeth. After breakfast, I wandered into the living room, pretending to admire the old photos on the mantel. There were pictures of my parents as children, of distant relatives, all carefully arranged. But tucked behind one of the frames, a corner of paper caught my eye. I pulled it out, trying to act casual, and froze. It was a receipt from a dental supply store in Omaha, dated only last month. Several boxes of dental instruments, sterilized and untouched. My stomach nodded. When I brought it up casually over lunch, she simply nodded. "Oh, I needed them for a craft project." The lie was so perfunctory it could have been a punchline. But I knew better. This was not a craft project. That look in her eyes, that calmness, that patience, these were not traits of someone who created innocent projects. I decided to explore the house more thoroughly. I needed to know what I was dealing with. She was in the garden, humming softly, and I took the opportunity to check the upstairs rooms. They were neat, sterile almost, the beds perfectly made, closets organized with military precision. But there was a door at the far end of the hallway, one she had always kept closed. She had said it was a linen closet, but when I tried the handle, it rattled but did not open. I could hear faint creaking beyond it, and then the door was pulled open from the inside. She stood there, smiling, hand resting lightly on the doorknob. "Curious, are not you?" she said. "Be careful where you wander, Michael." I stepped back, pretending to be startled by the surprise, but my heart was pounding. There was fear in me I had not felt since I was a child alone in the woods. Something about the house, the way it breathed, the way she moved, everything was wrong. That evening, I found myself compelled to go through her papers when she was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables with a rhythm that seemed almost ceremonial. I discovered ledgers spanning decades, Meticulous lists of names, dates, and notes in shorthand. At first, they seemed mundane, like shopping lists or appointments. But the more I read, the more I realized what they really were. Records of people who had stayed in the house over the years, noting whether they were alone, whether anyone would notice their absence, and subtle remarks like, "Quiet tonight," "Leaves in morning," "Good candidate." I could not breathe. The house suddenly felt smaller, the walls closer. And then I found the ledger with my name. At first, I thought I was hallucinating, but there it was, written neatly in pencil, dated 2 years ago, before I even received the letter. Michael, alone, soon. I dropped the notebook, and the sound echoed through the empty house. She appeared behind me instantly, placing a hand on my shoulder. Her touch was cold, almost clinical. "You've always been smart, Michael," she said softly. "That's why I wrote to you. I needed to know if you were ready to see everything." Everything. The word hung in the air like smoke. I wanted to scream, to leave, to get in the car and drive until I could not recognize the land around me. But I felt trapped, knowing she had planned for this. Every letter, every call, every subtle piece of guidance had led me here. The next few days became a psychological trial. She did not threaten me, did not raise her voice, but her presence was oppressive. She would sit across from me for hours, reading silently, watching how I moved, noting every reaction. Occasionally, she would ask casual questions. "Do you think anyone would notice if you were gone for a few days?" I tried to laugh, tried to answer lightly, but her eyes bored into me. I could feel her evaluating, judging, and the realization sank deeper. She was still choosing her next steps. One night, I woke to the sound of scraping metal. It was slow and rhythmic, coming from the basement. I had convinced myself that it was old pipes, the house settling. But when I heard it again the following night, louder and more deliberate, I knew it was not. I found the courage to peek into the basement door. It was locked, but a faint light glimmered through the bottom crack. I pressed my ear against it and could hear the unmistakable sound of a chair creaking, a muffled breathing, and what sounded like someone whispering. I stumbled back into the living room and confronted her. Her reaction was calm, almost amused. "You're clever," she said. "Most people do not notice anything at all. But now that you see, you have to understand why it matters." Her calmness was more terrifying than any scream. She spoke with the patience of someone who had waited decades, who had refined every move, every reaction. She was not just dangerous, she was precise, deliberate, and terrifyingly normal. I began searching the house more systematically. I checked behind paintings, under floorboards, in closets. That's when I found it. A trap door under the rug in her bedroom. My hands shook as I lifted it. It led to a narrow staircase descending into darkness. At the bottom, I found a room lit by a single hanging bulb, walls lined with shelves. Each shelf held boxes neatly labeled with names, dates, and short notes. Some boxes were empty, some contained personal effects, and some held teeth, sterilized and wrapped in cloth. The room smelled faintly of antiseptic and something metallic that made my stomach churn. I realized then, in full clarity, what I had walked into. This was not a home. It was a meticulously maintained archive of disappearance, a museum of her victims, cataloged with precision. And I was part of her plan, The letter, the invitation, the resemblance to my grandmother, it had all been a lure. She had not aged like other people. She had evolved, hidden behind the mask of kindness, refining her system. She never hunted randomly. She hunted the overlooked, the alone, the invisible. And she had been watching me, measuring whether I could understand her world, whether I would see the pattern before it was too late. By now, the fear had transformed into a cold, analytical terror. I knew she was capable of anything, but I also knew she was patient. If she wanted me dead, it would be slow, controlled, and I might not even realize it until it was over. My only hope was to survive long enough to escape, to find someone who could believe me. That night, she brought me a cup of tea and sat across from me, watching as I sipped, nodding in approval at nothing in particular. "You see, Michael," she said softly, "the world ignores people like us, people like me, people like you. Sometimes it's better when no one notices." I nodded, pretending to understand, pretending to agree, while my mind raced for a plan. I had to leave. I had to find a way out. But as I went to bed, the house seemed alive with her presence. Every creak of the floorboards a warning, every shadow a movement, and every breath a reminder that I was not alone. In the morning, I decided I had to get evidence. I returned to the basement, taking photos with my phone, documenting the boxes, the ledger, the teeth, the photographs. I wanted proof, something that could survive long enough for someone else to know what she was. But when I returned to the basement, the room was empty. The boxes were gone, the shelves bare. It was as if the house had never existed. She stood at the top of the stairs, smiling. "You're clever," she said again, "but cleverness only buys you time." I realized then, fully, that I had underestimated her. She was not just a grandmother, not just a killer. She was a force, patient, hidden in plain sight for decades, and my arrival had only been part of a much larger plan. I did not sleep much that night. Every time my eyes closed, I saw the basement door, the neat rows of boxes, the teeth wrapped in cloth, the photos of faces staring back at me with frozen smiles. Morning came, gray and silent, with the kind of stillness that only small towns in Montana can hold. I had decided then I could not just stay and watch. I had to leave and take proof with me. But she knew. Of course she knew. That was the thing about her. She always knew. Breakfast was quiet, unnervingly so. She asked me if I'd slept well, and if I had any nightmares. I forced a smile and said yes, nodding. She watched me eat with the same calm, calculating patience I had come to recognize as dangerous. The fork in her hand moved slowly, deliberately. I had to act fast. After breakfast, I wandered the house again, pretending to look at the old photo albums, the antique clocks, the little trinkets she had collected over decades. My hands trembled slightly as I slid a photograph from behind a frame. It was a picture of a young man, alone in the living room, staring nervously at the camera. On the back was a date, the year 1987, and a note. No one noticed. Gone in 3 days. My stomach turned. I realized then that this was not just a collection of isolated incidents. She had been operating for decades, carefully cataloging people who had nobody to care for them, people whose absence would not trigger alarms. And now she had me. That realization brought with it a chilling certainty. The letter had not been an invitation. It had been a test. I decided to explore the house thoroughly, determined to find more evidence before it was too late. The basement door called to me, even though I knew she would notice. I waited until she went to water the garden, then crept toward the stairs.
The door was locked, of course, but I remembered seeing the spare key taped under the kitchen sink last night.
My hands shook as I retrieved it and slid it into the lock. The door creaked open, revealing darkness. The basement smelled of damp concrete, old wood, and something metallic, faint but unmistakable. I flipped on my flashlight and slowly descended the steps. At the bottom, the room opened into a larger chamber I had not seen before, a perfectly hidden archive. Shelves lined the walls, filled with more boxes, more carefully labeled items. Clothing, personal belongings, notebooks filled with dates and descriptions. In one corner, a chair that looked like it had been used recently. On the wall, a calendar marked with X's, counting days, and next to it, a list of names that spanned decades. I moved closer to one of the boxes and lifted the lid. Inside was a collection of teeth, neatly wrapped in cloth, some yellowed, some almost new. My stomach churned. On the shelf above, I saw photos I had glimpsed earlier, each with handwritten notes on the back. Lonely. No one cares. Perfect candidate. And then my gaze fell on a new folder, labeled with the year 2018. My name written in neat, familiar handwriting, accompanied by a note that made my blood run cold. Ready. I realized fully then what she had been preparing all these years. She was not just cataloging people. She was choosing them, testing them, ensuring that they were invisible to the world. She had studied me, waited, and now she was ready for the final step. I heard footsteps behind me, soft but deliberate. I froze. "Michael?" she called from the top of the stairs. "I see you've discovered the archives." Her voice was calm, warm almost, but it carried a weight that made my chest tighten. "It's important that you understand, everything I do has a reason. People disappear because no one notices. I merely facilitate what's inevitable." I swallowed, trying to speak, but my throat was dry. You're not my grandmother," I managed to say. She smiled, a small, patient smile. "No. I've worn her face for years because it's familiar, comforting. You trusted it. That trust, that makes everything easier." Panic surged. I backed toward the stairs, trying to calculate my options. There were windows, yes, but the house was isolated, surrounded by trees and fields stretching miles. The road was too far for anyone to hear me, and she had known me for weeks now, watching, measuring. My mind raced for a plan. "You could leave," she said, descending slowly, her hands empty but controlled. "I could let you leave. Or you could stay and learn what it means to be invisible." I realized she was not bluffing. She was not the erratic type who would lose control. She was patient, deliberate, a predator who had refined her methods over decades. And the terrifying part was, I could not see any weakness, any opening. I needed evidence. My phone was upstairs. I could not take it with me into the basement without her noticing. I needed to stall. "Tell me why," I said, trying to buy time. "Why do this? Why catalog them?" She paused, considering me. "Because someone must keep track. Someone must ensure that those the world forgets are cared for properly. If I do not do it, no one will. It's not murder. It's guidance." Her words were cold, calculated, and I understood that argument meant nothing in the light of what she had done. I had to move. I had to survive. But she had studied me too well.
I backed up the stairs slowly, pretending to be hesitant. Maybe I can help, I said, my voice trembling. I can help organize and maybe make things better. Her eyes lit up. See? You understand. That's why I wrote to you. Only someone who sees clearly can remain unharmed. I realized then that this was a test, not of strength, but of comprehension. If I reacted with fear, she would act. If I reacted with understanding, if I played her game, I might survive. Over the next hours, I pretended to assist her, showing interest in the ledgers, asking questions about the people she had recorded, even nodding in agreement when she explained her methods. But inside, I was planning. I memorized the layout of the basement, the location of the stairs, the placement of the boxes. I noted where she kept her keys, the timing of her movements.
Every small detail became ammunition for survival. That night, as she settled into her chair across from me with a book, I realized something horrifying. She could wait years, decades. Her patience was inexhaustible, and if I left any sign of rebellion, she would notice, and she would adjust, and she would continue. And I was trapped in a house where every wall, every object, every shadow belonged to her. Sleep came fitfully, dreams filled with the faces in the photographs, their smiles staring at me in accusation, in silent warning. I woke several times to the sound of her moving in the hall, footsteps slow and deliberate. And I knew that the world outside could not help me, not yet, not if she had measured every risk. The next morning, I made a decision. I would leave. But I could not simply run. I needed proof, evidence that would survive after I was gone. Evidence strong enough to make anyone believe the truth about Eleanor. No, not Eleanor. The woman wearing Eleanor's face. The predator who had hidden in plain sight for decades. I slipped my phone into my pocket, keeping it hidden, and made my way upstairs. She was in the kitchen, humming softly, making breakfast. I asked casual questions, praised her cooking, feigned interest in the house, all while keeping my movements deliberate. She did not notice the small camera app running on my phone. By late morning, I had photographs of the basement, the boxes, the ledger, the teeth. I had recorded audio of her describing her methods in that calm, patient voice. And just as I prepared to leave, I turned toward the living room and froze. A new photograph had appeared on the mantel. It was of me, taken without my knowledge. My expression caught mid-glance, and my eyes wide with fear. And on the back, in neat pencil, was written a single word: next. I understood then that I'd been too slow, too obvious. The game was no longer testing my patience. She had already begun her next step. I froze for a moment, staring at the photograph on the mantel. Me, my wide-eyed expression, caught unaware and captured forever by a hand that had been watching for weeks, no, for years. The word next, written on the back, was not just a warning. It was a promise. My pulse quickened. My mind raced. There was no time to hesitate. I glanced at her. She was standing by the stove, humming softly, stirring her coffee. Her back was to me, the calm rhythm of her movements a stark contrast to the storm of terror building inside me. I needed a plan, and I needed it fast. My phone was still in my pocket, recording. I had proof, yes, but proof alone would not save me if she noticed my next move. "Can I step outside for a moment?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She turned, and her eyes, those sharp, calculating eyes, met mine. She smiled faintly, and for a split second I thought I had been caught. But then she nodded.
"Of course," she said. "Fresh air is good for you. Just do not wander too far."
I exhaled quietly. This was my chance. Step 1. Get outside, get to the car, and start the engine. Step 2. Make it to the main road, call 911, show them the photos, the ledger, everything. Step 3. Do not look back. I stepped onto the porch. The rocking chair creaked under her weight as she leaned forward slightly, watching me. I forced myself to appear casual, keeping my phone concealed in my hand, ready to record everything if she turned on me. As I reached the car, I realized something terrifying. The tires were flat. Not one, not two, but all 4. And the gasoline tank was empty. Panic clawed at me, but I forced it down. I had expected some kind of obstacle, but this was meticulous, premeditated, and worse, anticipated. I turned back toward the house. She was standing at the edge of the porch now, hands clasped, expression serene. She did not yell. She did not run. She simply said, "You thought it would be that easy, Michael, but I've planned for every step." Her voice was calm, almost tender, and yet it was the coldest sound I had ever heard. I swallowed, realizing I had walked straight into a predator who had studied me longer than I had lived in some sense. Every letter, every word, every memory she had used, it had all been preparation. I circled the house, looking for another exit. There was a shed and a gate leading to the back field. I ran toward it, but she followed at a distance, silent, slow. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears, loud and erratic, like a warning. I reached the back gate, yanking it open, and stumbled into the tall corn that bordered the property. The stalks towered over me, hiding my movements. I sprinted through the field, lunging over uneven ground, my lungs burning, hoping the distance would be enough. But then I heard it, the soft, deliberate sound of footsteps behind me. Not running, not chasing, just walking, measuring, waiting. I darted toward the tree line, the forest beyond the cornfield, hoping it would provide cover. My phone was in my hand, recording. I needed proof. I needed someone to know. I pressed the record button again and whispered into it, "She is not my grandmother. She's a predator. She's cataloged people for decades. I choked, unable to finish. Then I saw her. She had appeared at the edge of the trees, as if she had anticipated my escape. She raised a hand, slow and deliberate, not threatening, but commanding. It was like she owned the very air around me. "Michael," she called, her voice carrying over the field. "You're clever, but cleverness will not save you. You should have stayed inside, where it's safe." I ducked behind a tree, heart hammering. The sun was beginning to set, and shadows stretched long over the fields. I had to make it to the county road, at least a mile away. I crept, and then ran, dodging through the underbrush, my lungs on fire. Every rustle of leaves, every snapping twig made me flinch, expecting her to appear instantly. I burst onto the gravel road and ran as fast as I could, waving my arms for any passing car. Minutes passed. The horizon seemed empty. Then, faintly, a truck engine roared in the distance. Relief surged. I sprinted toward the road, waving, screaming. The truck slowed. I ran into the light, and the driver stopped, eyes wide, confusion and fear mingling on their face. I barely spoke, stammering about my grandmother, about the house, about the basement, about the teeth. I pulled out the photos and showed the ledger. The driver called 911 immediately. When the police arrived, we went back to the house together. But the house was empty. Every trace of what I had seen, the basement, the shelves, the boxes, the teeth, the ledgers, was gone. It was as if it had never existed. The house smelled faintly of lavender and mothballs, perfectly normal, nothing unusual. She was gone. I asked the neighbors. They said the house had been empty for years. Some claimed they had seen a woman matching my grandmother's description, but they could not be sure. Others said the place was haunted, that odd sounds had been heard over the years. But no one could give the police any concrete evidence. Days passed. The media reported